The Owl House does a lot of things well. One of those things is the diversity present in its various family dynamics. So, let's talk about that. I don't think I'm saying anything too wild when I say that family is pretty central to the Owl House's story. It's a constant running theme, and the beauty of how they handle it is in the vast array of family dynamics on display, both good and bad. If we look even just at the original Hexside trio of Luce, Gus, and Willow, we find a blend of different family structures. Luce is from a single-parent household where the parent is a mom and the dad has passed away. She is also currently not living with her mom, but rather Calling Ida a foster mother seems a little generous, all things considered, but that's the closest analogy I can come to. Luce has found herself separated from her mom due to unforeseen circumstances, and is therefore living with someone else. So fostering seems like a close enough analogy. Still a single-parent household, though. Luce also ends up with an adopted sister by the end of the show, V, who was adopted later in life, something which is unfortunately uncommon. Gus is also from a single-parent household, but unlike with Luce, his parent is a dad, which is notable because, of course, the stereotype when it comes to black single-parent households is that of absentee fathers. Gus's other parent, whoever they might have been, is never even mentioned, so we don't know if something happened, or if Perry just wanted to have a kid on his own. Whatever the situation is, they've made it work for them. And Willow, of course, has two dads. It's unknown how they had her, be that adoption, a surrogate, magic, or maybe one of them is trans. At the end of the day, that doesn't really matter. Willow has two dads, and we love them. If you were paying attention, you've probably noticed that none of the main trio come from a traditional nuclear family. And yeah, get used to that because the majority of families in this show aren't the traditional nuclear family. It's a small detail, but it's one I appreciate because it reflects reality a lot better than if every single one of our characters had a mom, a dad, and a white picket fence. Families come in all shapes and sizes, and showing that, especially on a kids' TV show, is something I deeply appreciate. But what I appreciate possibly even more is that the Owl House shows examples of parents and parental figures unmistakably fucking up. And even when the adults don't acknowledge it, the show does. Even within the quote-unquote good families on the show, things aren't perfect, and even adults make mistakes. And there's levels to it. It's very much a case of no parent or guardian is perfect, but there's a definite point of no return where things are no longer okay. So I figured we might take a walk down the Owl House's parental missteps road, starting with honest mistakes and descending into these are no longer mistakes, this is just abuse territory. Obviously, we'll be looking at how the show handles these situations as we go, because I maintain it does so marvelously. For this conversation, I'm specifically pulling in what I consider the central four families of the show, those being the Clawthorns, the Wittebanes, the Nocedas, and the Blights. Top of this list is Camila Noceda. Camila is a genuinely good person and a good mother, but she still makes mistakes. Hell, her biggest mistake as a parent is quite literally the inciting incident. Camila is a mom, yes, but she's also human. She's a single mother of a young teenager, and a widow. She has her own traumas from being bullied as a child, and while she loves Luce's passion and her imagination, she sees her own daughter struggling with the same things she did when she was young, and she panics. So when Luce's headmaster suggests Camila send her to a reality check camp over summer, she accepts even though she doesn't want to, which leads to Luce running away to the demon realm and sets everything in motion. Of course, Camila doesn't even realize her daughter is missing for a long time because of V, a runaway basilisk from the demon realm. Basilisks being shapeshifters, V spotted Luce and took her form to blend in the human realm, only to run into Camila and get kind of half-accidentally dragged into the charade of being Luce. And this, I think, is where Camila's truest character as a parent shines the clearest. Because when she finds out about V, about this literal demon from another world who's been living in her house pretending to be her daughter, she's freaked out, of course, but she also recognizes the fact that V is a child, around the same age as Luce, that she's an abuse victim hiding from her abusers in the best way she could think to do so. She accepts V as her own to the point of actually giving her a home as herself rather than hiding in Luce's image. In the episode where this is revealed, though, she does make another mistake. When she begs Luce to stay with her in the human realm once she finds a way back. It was an emotionally fraught time, and she was scared out of her mind, so it's understandable, and I don't fault her for it, but it still hurt Luce. What's truly important in relation to this, though, is that once Luce does come back and Camila meets some of the friends she made in the demon realm as well as Luce's girlfriend, she changes her mind. And when it looks like Luce might be preparing to make a choice that would make her miserable in the long run, Camila steps up and supports her in continuing her studies in magic and spending time on the Boiling Isles. And of course, we can't talk about Camila Noceda without mentioning when Luce and her friends got catapulted out of the demon realm and stuck in the human realm. Luce, of course, immediately goes home. She goes home with a troop of 3 witches and a grimwalker, kids around her age, who have nowhere to go and no one to turn to, who are in an entirely new world with unfamiliar rules and customs. And Camila, who I remind you is a single mother, she takes them all in. She essentially becomes a single mother of 6 overnight. She finds space for all of them in her home, with the girls bunking in Luce's room and the boys taking the basement. She scrapes together her finances to support them. She tries to accommodate their needs even when she doesn't understand them.
Do you think this food is okay? I wish I knew how to make demon food for your friends. Would they, prefer to drink blood?
Mom.
Camila Noceda is a wonderful mother, but that doesn't stop her from being human. She makes mistakes, but she cares, and she owns up to them, and that makes all the difference. Next on the list is the Clawthorns, and here we actually have a couple generations to go through. I'm gonna start with Ida, though, because who doesn't love Mama Ida, right? Idalyn Clawthorn did not start the series as a good mother. I'd argue she wasn't even really a mom when the show started. Sure, she'd raised King since he was a baby, but when we first met them, she really didn't treat him like her child. I'm not saying she didn't love him, obviously she did, but she wasn't his mom. She called him her roommate when introducing him to Luce. She antagonized and teased him in ways that seem much more reminiscent of friends than parent and child, and oh yeah, he technically worked for her. But at the same time, she's also not completely not his mom. Even in the early days, King knows to go to her for help when he's in over his head. She takes him to the playground, and again, she does care for him. But it's only when Luce comes into their lives and makes her rethink things that she actually truly becomes a mom, which is perfectly illustrated in how it's only once Ida really becomes his mom that King takes her surname. And we can't talk about Ida and King without mentioning Ida's biggest mistake. And I'm not talking about not telling him about her curse. I covered that in my last video. No, I'm talking about how Ida let King believe he was the king of demons his entire life. She told him tales about what a king does as a child after seeing him stack things into little figurines, and King grabbed onto the idea that he'd once been a fierce tyrant who was then drained of his power. And Ida went along with it, because it made him happy. But it went on for too long, to the point where King actually believed it, and formed a big part of his identity around being the king of demons. So of course, when he learns the truth, his entire reality shatters, and he has a massive existential crisis at 8 years old. Of course, Ida didn't tell him about being a king out of any sense of malice. She did the wrong thing for the right reasons. She found something that made her kid happy, and she didn't want to take away that happiness. In the episode where King discovers where he came from, she apologizes and owns up to her mistakes, which at the end of the day is, again, the most important thing you can do as a parent when you've messed up. Really, it's important in general, but especially parents need to learn that apologizing to your children is not just a good thing to do, it is absolutely vital. Respecting your children as human beings shouldn't be some kind of radical new idea, it should be common sense. Ida also shows genuine worry for both Luce and King as we approach the Day of Unity, which is essentially the end of the world. It's one of the few times I've seen a mentor in this kind of media voice how the main characters are just kids who shouldn't have to deal with this. She even tries to send them away, which obviously doesn't work because Luce is stubborn like that, but I appreciate the thought. And then, when it becomes obvious that Luce isn't leaving, Ida hands her a mission as far away from the actual event as possible, breaking Amity out of being grounded. Of course, that doesn't end up working either, but she tried, is my point. That's all we can really ask of our parents at the end of the day. Before we segue into the Blights, I will briefly talk about Ida's parents. Well, I'm gonna talk about Dell, since I have 2 whole other videos where I talk about Gwen and her mistakes and how she owns up to and fixes them. But Dell I've only talked about from a disability perspective, so let's talk about him as a father. We don't see a lot of him, but from the glimpses we get, we can tell he's a gentle, understanding man who loves his daughters dearly. But I do think he made a mistake in how he handled his relationship with Ida after the Owl Beast injured him. He tried to give her space and let her come to him in her own time. On its face, this really isn't a bad thing. It can absolutely be the right thing to do. With Ida, though, that's not what she needed. She needed to know he didn't blame her, and that even though he doesn't think there's anything to forgive, he'll still forgive her if that's what she needs from him. In his effort to give her the space he thought she needed, their relationship didn't get repaired for, 30 years? It's only when he and Gwen work together to practically force Ida to sit down and have a conversation with him that she can get the closure she needs. Granted, it's not entirely his fault it took this long. Gwen certainly wasn't helping things when it came to Ida distancing herself from her parents. But still, despite the good intentions, this was a misstep, and while they didn't directly address it, it was great to see Ida finally receive that closure and the permission to forgive herself. Okay, now we can talk about the Blights. Starting with Alador because he's objectively the superior parent, which is not saying he didn't mess up, because he did, majorly, but when compared to Odalia, night and day, honestly. When we're first introduced to Alador, it's in Willow's memory, where his shadow is standing shoulder to shoulder with Odalia, telling Amity she can no longer be friends with Willow because Willow's magic is too weak for the standards of a Blight. Suffice it to say, no one liked the Blight parents for the entirety of Season 1, and for good reason. But then we reach Season 2, and we actually meet Alador in person. And he's not the super posh, stuck-up man we were expecting. He's an abomination-stained, tired-looking man wandering through life seemingly on autopilot. He looks dead inside, and throughout the episode, we see time and again moments where he's off in his own world, Odalia prompts him, and he falls back into the same pattern we saw from him in Willow's memory. This tiny clip alone, I think, went a long way towards recontextualizing how the fandom viewed the Blights, especially Alador's relationship with his wife.
Your human language is hard to understand, but I think I see your point. If you're interested in talking things through...
And then, of course, at the end of the episode, Alador finally snaps out of the familiar pattern when Odalia is about to break her word to Amity. That, apparently, is a bridge too far for him. It makes me think that Alador is most likely the Blight by birth, while Odalia married into the family, because that reaction seemed personal. Also makes me wonder if perhaps the beginning of their relationship was something similar to what he did to Amity when she was young, his parents pressuring him to be with someone who would be good for the family instead of someone he actually liked. But that's getting into the realm of headcanon. Focusing back on canon itself, Alador is far, far from perfect, but he takes steps towards okay in the episode Reaching Out. Though at first he messes up by forbidding Amity from participating in the Bonesborough Brawl, something she wanted to do specifically because he'd done it when he was her age, and she hoped if she wanted to, they'd have something to bond over, and setting an abomaton to follow her around to make sure she doesn't sneak out anyway, by the end of the episode, he has taken steps towards repairing his relationship with her. He's listened to her, learned who she's dating, that her plans for the future have changed, and even clocks why she's recently changed her hair color to purple. They're still not okay, and he has a lot to make up for both with Amity and the twins, but it's a start. And as we learn in Clouds on the Horizon, his plan was always to spend more time with his kids after the Day of Unity. Of course, that's not gonna happen because the Day of Unity is the end of the world, but he didn't know that. In this episode, we also learn that Odalia has a much tighter hold on Alador than we previously thought. She essentially threatens him with the well-being of their children, and treats him more like an employee than her supposed life partner. It's in this episode that we learn that everything Alador has done has been his own misguided attempt at keeping his kids safe. It doesn't excuse his past actions, but it goes a good way towards explaining them. Frankly, he should have divorced Odalia ages ago, but abusive relationships aren't things that you can just walk away from, necessarily. Especially when your abusive partner is the CEO of the company you work for. It's when Odalia admits she knew Belos was going to pull something ruinous on the Day of Unity that Alador finally gets the shock his system needs to bring everything crashing down. Their business and their relationship in one fell swoop. The start of their divorce frankly sounds more like a firing than anything else, and it goes a long way towards illustrating how messed up their relationship really was behind the scenes. I think we all knew it wasn't good before this, but I don't think anyone expected it to be this bad.
And you won't be getting your severance package.
Oh, Titan. That was terrifying.
So, let's move on to the significantly worse half of this wannabe power couple. Well, she wanted them to be. I don't think Alador ever really cared about that. Odalia Blight, and I'm gonna have to call her Blight because we don't know her maiden name, is a terrible person. Not just for how she treated her husband, but also how she treated her children, especially Amity. We see hints of the twins being scared of her here and there, but because Amity is a much more central character, we know more about her relationship with her parents. Starting with how Odalia made her dye her hair green, because Odalia herself has naturally green hair, as do the twins, while Amity inherited Alador's brown. In fact, Amity looks quite a lot like her father in her coloring, though she inherited more of her mother's facial features. So, Odalia made her dye her hair green. She also made Amity wear a pendant that allowed her to beam her thoughts directly into her daughter's brain, allowing her to verbally abuse her child at any time without anyone being the wiser. It is messed up, to say the least. Odalia is the kind of mother who expects perfection from her children, exemplified also in Edric and Emera's constant use of illusion charms to keep their appearances refined. She seeks to control who Amity socializes with, what she does, and where her future is going. She's mapped out her idea for the perfect child who would reflect well on her, and does everything in her power, up to and including nearly killing Luce that one time, to make sure it happens. The last time we see her on the show, she's glowering at Alador and Amity as they joyfully reunite after the end of the world has been successfully averted. She's not forgiven, nor reached out to. Her children and her ex cut contact with her, and we don't see her in the epilogue. I'm going to choose to believe that without Alador's talents, she disappeared into obscurity. It's what she deserves. As for Alador in the epilogue, we get a hint of Aladarius, which implies Hunter and Amity could become actual step-siblings, which is a concept that just delights me to no end. But that's getting just a little ahead of myself. It's time to talk about the Wittebanes. Well, it's time to talk about Emperor Belos, aka Philip Wittabane, and Hunter Demone. Yes, I'm going to stick with that surname for him, and no, I'm not taking criticism at this time. When we're first introduced to Hunter, he is presented to us as the teen prodigy of the Emperor's Coven. Later, when we've actually gotten to know him a bit, we see him claim Belos as his uncle, but he also tells Luce that Belos found him. I don't think anyone was expecting Belos to be a caring or nurturing guardian, and the more we saw of Hunter's home life, the more that was confirmed for us. He's severely overworked, stressed, and Belos absolutely is not above both emotional and physical abuse. But that's not the end of it, because Hunter is a Grimwalker. What is a Grimwalker, you may ask? Something akin to a clone, or a reborn version of a deceased person? It's in the name, Grimwalker, a dead thing that walks. The deceased person in question is Caleb Wittabane, Philip's older brother. The two of them were human orphans in the time of the witch trials in North America. They were, in fact, witch hunters, until Caleb met a witch named Evelyn, presumably Evelyn Clawthorne, though that's never strictly speaking confirmed, just heavily hinted at. Caleb and Evelyn fell in love, and Evelyn got pregnant, and Philip flipped his shit, to put it lightly. It all culminated in Philip murdering his brother, and in his messed up feelings of betrayal and guilt and grief, he began making Grimwalkers. So many Grimwalkers. There is a graveyard of Golden Guards, as each followed their progenitor's footsteps and betrayed Bellows in some way. Hunter is a replacement and an effort to forge a version of Caleb that won't betray Bellows by siding with the witches. Of course, Hunter knows none of this. He was raised believing himself to be just a powerless witch, which is another layer to add to all this, because beyond just the standard emotional, physical, and psychological abuse Bellows put him through, he was also raised believing himself to be disabled, when he was actually just an entirely different species. All the hardship he faced for being a powerless witch, the judgment for being born lesser, the internalized ableism, and none of it was even applicable to him in the first place. He's not a disabled witch, he's a standard-issue Grimwalker, if such a thing can be said to exist given how rare Grimwalkers are, and how hard they are to make, but still. He's been lied to about the fundamental aspects of his very being from the moment he was born. This is also why I don't see him gaining some of Flapjack's powers after Flapjack sacrificed himself as a disability cure. Because Hunter isn't a witch. He's also made, in part, out of the same stuff Palismen are. Palistrom wood was used to make his keratin. That's responsible for a lot of the minutiae keeping a body functioning. I know most of us know it for, hair and nails, but keratin proteins are present in other places in our bodies too. Our skin and corneas come to mind, but back to the subject at hand. We get to see some moments where Bellows is almost gentle with Hunter, telling him fondly of the human realm, or putting on a mask of concern and comfort after he's lashed out. It's a disturbingly realistic portrayal of an abuser, even if the situation itself is fantastical to say the least. This hot-cold cycle that repeats itself over and over, giving the victim just enough hope that their abuser will change when they never do. But, of course, Hunter, like all his predecessors, betrays Bellows. Unlike all those who came before him, though, Hunter had a support system ready and waiting. He didn't know it at the time, but he'd managed to make friends outside the Emperor's Coven who were absolutely willing to go to bat for him, and even found an adult who actually cared for him. Darius Demone began his relationship with Hunter as one of misplaced resentment born from grief. Darius's mentor, someone he was very close to, was the previous Golden Guard. We don't know exactly what happened to him, but given the givens, it's a fair assumption he began to question things and Bellows eliminated him, necessitating Hunter's creation. So Darius resented this kid who'd stepped into his mentor's colors, until Hunter did something unexpected. He made friends outside the Coven system. He stood up for them, protected them, even when he thought doing so would bring a severe punishment. And so, Darius took Hunter under his wing, and in the end, it's implied very strongly this became a more permanent situation. So, Bellows got stomped into a pile of goop, and Hunter got an adopted dad who appreciates his passion for the magnificent creature known as a wolf. All is right with the world. The Owl House handles families in a wonderfully nuanced way. Things aren't ever perfect. No relationship is. But the difference between one where things are bad but salvageable and one where things are foobar is clear. It's all about reciprocity. The reason Alador and Gwen could rebuild their relationships with their kids, while Odalia and Bellows never would, it's in how Alador and Gwen could sit down and listen and internalize where they'd messed up and strive to be better, something neither Odalia or Bellows would ever even dream of doing. And that feels like such a massively important thing to showcase, especially in children's media. Long story short, The Owl House is a very good show. You should absolutely go watch it if you haven't. Thanks for watching this video. If you liked it, consider liking it and maybe subscribing. I will be back here Thursday after next. Bye!